Welcome to Gender Chronicles. If you have explored gender studies beyond the curriculums offered in colleges, you probably have heard of the idea of male disposability. What is male disposability? When men's rights activists say that in the eyes of society men are disposable, what do they mean? Today we will delve into this question in two ways. First, we will define the concept. Second, we will examine how this concept was used in 3 books. The first book is The Myth of Male Power by Farrell. The second book is The Will to Kill Making Sense of Senseless Murder by James Allen Fox and Jack Levin. The third book is The Male Disposability, The Sacrifice of Men in War, Suicide and Work by Peter Wright. Okay, male disposability. It is a sociological and psychological concept that refers to the perception and treatment of men as more expendable or less inherently valuable than women in certain social, cultural and historical contexts. This concept posits that society often places a higher priority on protecting and preserving women, especially in scenarios involving physical danger, resource scarcity or reproductive considerations. At the same time, men are expected to endure risks or sacrifices for the collective good. Here are key aspects of male disposability: historical and evolutionary roots. From an evolutionary standpoint, male disposability is often linked to reproductive strategies. Since one man can theoretically contribute to the reproduction of many offspring, while women's reproductive capacity is biologically limited, men were historically seen as more expendable in terms of survival. This notion has historically justified roles that put men in dangerous positions, such as soldiers, hunters, or laborers in hazardous industries. War and conflict. In wartime, men are overwhelmingly conscripted or expected to volunteer as soldiers, placing them at the forefront of physical risk. Historically, societal narratives have glorified male sacrifice in battle as a noble and expected duty, reinforcing the idea of their expendability for the collective. Occupational hazards. Men disproportionately occupy high-risk professions, such as mining, construction, logging and firefighting. According to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, men account for over 90% of workplace fatalities globally, reflecting an implicit societal acceptance of male exposure to dangerous conditions. Legal and social constructs. Male disposability is often cited in family law, where child custody and alimony decisions are perceived to prioritize women, leaving men to bear financial and emotional burdens. Homelessness statistics often reflect gender disparity, with men making up the majority of the homeless population in many countries, indicating a lack of societal safety nets for vulnerable men. Cultural representations. Media and cultural narratives often reinforce male disposability by glorifying male sacrifice. For instance, male heroes in literature, film and folklore frequently meet their demise to protect women or society. In natural disasters or emergencies, women and children first is a commonly accepted evacuation protocol, symbolizing societal prioritization of women's safety over men's. Let's start with Dr. Warren Farrell's book, The Myth of Male Power. In this book, Farrell explores the concept of male disposability, which is central to his argument about the dynamics of gender relations. Farrell argues that contrary to the commonly held belief that men are inherently powerful in society, men are, in fact, often regarded as expendable, particularly in the context of their roles in family, work and war. This disposability is embedded in cultural, economic and societal expectations that devalue men's lives, particularly when they are viewed as tools or resources for achieving societal goals. One of the primary ways Farrell highlights male disposability is through the lens of war. Historically, men have been overwhelmingly conscripted or volunteered to fight in wars with little regard for their individual lives. While the war rhetoric often frames men as heroes, Farrell contends that they are treated as expendable commodities, sent to fight and die for causes that are often beyond their control or choice. He draws attention to how the loss of male life in wartime is viewed as a necessary sacrifice. In contrast, the loss of female life in similar contexts is often perceived as a tragedy of a greater magnitude. This unequal value placed on male versus female lives demonstrates the entrenched societal idea of male disposability. Farrell extends this argument into the realm of family dynamics, where he notes that men are often expected to be the primary providers and protectors of their families. This role, while often regarded as a sign of male strength, comes with an inherent cost: the physical and emotional toll of constantly putting oneself at risk for the benefit of others. Men are encouraged to work in dangerous professions, such as construction or mining, where the risk of injury and death is high. Despite the grave risks, these deaths are rarely framed as tragic or preventable, but are instead accepted as part of the male role in society. Furthermore, Farrell argues that male disposability is perpetuated by societal narratives that ignore or downplay the vulnerabilities and needs of men. The expectation that men must always be strong, stoic, and self-sufficient prevents them from seeking help for mental health issues or expressing vulnerability, further contributing to the societal perception of men as expendable. Men, therefore, are socialized to internalize these expectations, often at the expense of their own well-being and life satisfaction. In summary, Farrell's concept of male disposability challenges the dominant narratives surrounding gender power, asserting that men are often treated as disposable in both social and structural contexts, with their lives undervalued in ways that extend beyond traditional notions of privilege and power. The second book that applies this concept is The Will to Kill Making Sense of Senseless Murder by James Allen Fox and Jack Levin. In this book, Fox and Levin examine the psychology of violence, exploring the patterns and causes behind senseless murder. While the book primarily focuses on understanding violent crime, it also touches on the concept of male disposability, especially in relation to violence, death, and societal expectations of men. The authors argue that men, particularly young men, are disproportionately involved in violent crimes as both perpetrators and victims. This statistical reality highlights a fundamental aspect of male disposability. Society often views men, especially those from marginalized groups, as expendable in the context of violent conflict. In the case of murder, male victims are less likely to receive widespread public sympathy or media attention compared to their female counterparts, reinforcing the notion that men's lives are undervalued. Fox and Levin contend that this trend reflects deep-rooted societal assumptions that men are naturally suited to aggressive and violent behavior, which in turn contributes to their higher rates of victimization in violent crimes. The book discusses how socialization plays a role in perpetuating this concept. From an early age, boys are often taught to suppress emotional vulnerability and to adopt a tough and stoic self-presentation. This social conditioning makes it less likely for men to seek help when they are struggling with issues such as depression or suicidal ideation, thereby increasing their susceptibility to violent outcomes. Men are conditioned to believe that their worth is linked to their ability to protect, provide, and demonstrate physical dominance. These gender norms, while emphasizing strength and resilience, often ignore the emotional and psychological toll that these pressures take on men, contributing to their disposability in violent settings. Fox and Levin also explore the idea that men are expected to put themselves at risk in dangerous occupations, such as law enforcement, military service, and hazardous labor, further reinforcing the idea of male disposability. The loss of male life in such contexts, while tragic, is frequently normalized or even valorized, and men are often seen as fulfilling their societal duty by sacrificing their safety for the benefit of others. The book underscores that male disposability is not merely a byproduct of individual choice or fate, but a deeply ingrained social construct that shapes how men are treated, both in life and death. In sum, The Will to Kill presents a sobering analysis of how societal expectations of men contribute to their disposability, particularly in violent and high-risk contexts, where their lives are often considered expendable for the sake of societal goals or gender norms. Our final book uses the concept as a title: The Male Disposability, The Sacrifice of Men in War, Suicide and Work by Peter Wright. In this book, Wright explores the concept of male disposability by critically examining how men are often seen as expendable in various aspects of society, particularly in relation to war, dangerous labor, and mental health struggles. Wright argues that male disposability is not a natural or biological condition, but rather a result of deep-rooted social and cultural norms that devalue men's lives, particularly in contexts where they are expected to serve societal or collective interests. One of the central themes of Wright's book is how men are disproportionately impacted by the expectations placed on them in the realms of war and military service. Historically, men have been called upon to fight in wars, often with little regard for their personal well-being. Wright highlights how men are routinely expected to sacrifice their lives for the state or for national interests, with their deaths in battle often framed as noble or necessary, even when the human cost is immense. The cultural narratives surrounding war tend to glorify male soldiers as heroes. Yet this glorification masks the underlying reality that these men are expendable in the eyes of the state and society. The emotional toll and the psychological trauma that male soldiers face are often underreported or ignored, further reinforcing the idea of male disposability in wartime. Wright also examines the high rate of male involvement in dangerous and physically demanding professions such as construction, mining, and manufacturing. These occupations often come with a significant risk of injury or death. Yet men are encouraged or even expected to take on these roles in order to provide for their families or contribute to society. Wright argues that these expectations reflect a deep-seated belief in the expendability of male lives in the service of economic production and the maintenance of industrial society. Men are more likely to be employed in jobs that place them at risk, yet their deaths or injuries on the job are frequently seen as unfortunate but inevitable rather than preventable. Another key aspect of male disposability that Wright addresses is the disproportionately high rates of male suicide. Men are less likely to seek help for mental health issues, as societal norms dictate that they should remain strong and self-reliant. This pressure leads many men to suffer in silence, and the lack of support for male mental health contributes to the alarmingly high rates of suicide among men. Wright contends that society's failure to address male emotional vulnerability reinforces the notion that men are disposable, particularly when they are unable or unwilling to conform to the ideal of emotional stoicism. These three books bear three similarities. First, they address the problem of male vulnerability and societal expectations. The three books challenge the traditional notion of male privilege by highlighting how societal expectations often make men vulnerable, particularly in dangerous or high-risk environments. They suggest that men are socialized to view themselves as expendable and are frequently asked to sacrifice their lives or well-being for larger societal goals such as war, work, and economic production. Second, both the myth of male power and the male disposability heavily emphasize the role of war in perpetuating the idea of male disposability. Men have historically been expected to fight and die in wars, with their lives often being regarded as secondary to the collective needs of the state or society. Similarly, the will to kill acknowledges the disproportionate number of male perpetrators and victims in violent crimes, illustrating how male disposability plays out in contexts of aggression and societal conflict. Third, each book touches on how men are culturally expected to suppress vulnerability and emotional expression, which contributes to the high rates of male mental health struggles, including suicide. This socialization toward emotional stoicism is seen as a crucial aspect of male disposability, as it leads men to internalize the belief that their emotional needs are secondary, further perpetuating their marginalization. These books are distinct in focus and framework. First, The Myth of Male Power is primarily concerned with how society marginalizes men by framing them as powerful in certain contexts while simultaneously ignoring their suffering and vulnerability. Farrell applies the concept of male disposability within the larger framework of gender power dynamics, exploring how men are pressured to adhere to traditional roles of strength and provider, even at the cost of their own well-being. The Will to Kill focuses on the psychology of violence, exploring male disposability through the lens of violent crime. The book emphasizes how men, particularly young men, are disproportionately involved as both perpetrators and victims of violence. The authors argue that male disposability is deeply embedded in how men are socialized to view violence as an acceptable or necessary means of asserting power or solving problems. The Male Disposability offers a more direct and broad exploration of how male lives are treated as expendable in war, dangerous work, and suicide. Peter Wright systematically examines the concept, specifically addressing the societal and institutional structures that contribute to male disposability, including the labor market, military service, and mental health crises. When it comes to the role of war, the myth of male power takes a broader sociological perspective, arguing that men's role in war, though often framed as heroic, is ultimately one of disposability. Farrell critiques how the state and society use men's willingness to sacrifice as a tool to maintain power and control. The Male Disposability places heavy emphasis on the literal sacrifice of men in war, comparing their disposability in military service to that in other hazardous roles like mining or construction. Wright delves into the physical risks men are encouraged to take, emphasizing the normalization of male sacrifice. The Will to Kill does not explore war as centrally as the other two, but rather uses violence and crime as a backdrop for understanding male disposability in terms of aggression and victimization. It discusses how societal structures and media portrayals often present men as expendable, particularly in violent contexts. In relation to mental health and suicide, the Male Disposability and the Myth of Male Power emphasize how men are less likely to seek help for mental health issues, as societal norms dictate that they must remain emotionally strong and independent. Wright specifically discusses the high rates of male suicide, exploring how this contributes to the disposability narrative. The Will to Kill touches on the concept of male mental health, but frames it more through the lens of violent crime and socialization, focusing on how male aggression and violence often mask deeper psychological vulnerabilities. While it acknowledges male disposability in the context of mental health, it places more emphasis on the connection between male violence and the societal structures that normalize it. So what do you think? Do you think societal expectations of masculinity contribute to the notion of male disposability? If so, how? In what ways do you think the media portrays male victims of violence compared to female victims? How does this impact the perception of male disposability? Do you believe that men are socialized to see themselves as expendable in dangerous jobs or in situations like war? Why or why not? How do you think the high rates of male suicide relate to the broader concept of male disposability? What societal changes could help reduce these rates? Do you think men receive the same level of sympathy and support in times of crisis as women do? How can this disparity be addressed? In what ways are men's roles in family life framed as sacrificial or disposable, especially in terms of being providers and protectors? How might challenging the idea of male disposability change the way society views men's rights, health, and well-being? What role can education play in changing the narrative of male disposability? Are there particular industries or social structures where male disposability is more evident? How can these environments be changed to better value male lives? Thank you for watching. If you have found this video rewarding, please leave your comment below, like it and subscribe. Is there a topic you would like us to address? Don't hesitate to let us know.